Bengals are laying 3.5 points. Bengals minus 190, Dolphins plus 155. Total set at 47.5. Now, yesterday when we were talking about this game, the Bengals were laying 4 points. So here comes a touch of that Miami money, bringing this spread down a half point. The last time these two teams met, December 6th, 2020. But when you look at this game, the big storyline, the narrative, we've been talking about narratives all show long, is how effective will Tua Tagovailoa be? Because last week, as we saw against the Bills, first it was concussion protocol, and then it was, nope, don't worry about it. I know I stumbled. I know I fell on my way back to the huddle. It's just a back injury. It's a tightened up back. It's a hyperextended back. I'm going to be fine. You have to take that into consideration tonight. How much of a factor it is something to be discussed, but I think we're both leaning Bengals, are we not?
Yeah, I think there are just too many things pointing in the direction of the Bengals, because looking at Tua and his injury status and the short week and the fact that Miami had to skip a practice because of the hurricane, they had to leave early. There are just too many factors, I think, because if it wasn't a short week, maybe I would risk putting my money on Tua and the Dolphins, but he has less time to recover from whatever that was on Sunday against the Bills. And also, at some point, I think we see this Miami defense actually give up some points, because so far it's been bend but not break for the Dolphins defense. They've given up a ton of yards through the air. In fact, they've given up the second most passing yards through the air to opposing offenses through the first 3 games of the season. We haven't seen it in the final score because they won that game against the Ravens despite giving up, 38 points to Baltimore? And they won that game against the Bills despite giving up 400 yards to Josh Allen and company. So I think the way I'm going to be playing this one is probably the Bengals, probably Joe Burrow over his passing yards, because I do think that they have so many weapons that it's tough to kind of pick a receiver in which to put your faith in. But I do think it's the Bengals. But it makes me a little nervous because right now the money's going the opposite direction. We've seen this line go to 3.5. But honestly, I feel like people are just seeing that this is still above a key number of 3. And they're just saying, hey, maybe this can be a close game, and we'll take that hook.
Well, this is a tweet that just came down from Tom Pelissero from NFL Network, the NFL Network insider. And he says that Tua Tagovailoa is listed as questionable with back and ankle issues, but he is expected to play tonight, barring a setback. So hearing that, I didn't realize he had ankle issues as well. This makes me continue to lean Bengals. I like the Bengals here in primetime. I think they're going to have a lot of success with Joe Burrow as long as they can protect Joe Burrow just a little bit. And now that is a big if, because he's been sacked 15 times already in the first 3 games of the season. That is tied with Carson Wentz of the Commanders for the most sacks in the NFL thus far. So those 2 quarterbacks have been pushed down to the turf quite a bit. But if they can keep him upright, the Dolphins are 29th against the pass, and we know how talented those Cincinnati receivers are. So as long as they get a little protection for Joe Burrow, I think he can burn them down the field.
Yeah, I just saw where Lyle Collins is questionable for this one, which is not good if you need Joe Burrow to get any kind of protection. But wasn't he supposed to be the piece that made this offensive line so much better? And so far, we haven't really seen it. So maybe it's not as big of a factor as maybe I am supposing. Looking at the Dolphins injury report, I think this is where the real questions start to surface. Not only just Tua, but Xavier Howard, their top cornerback, on the injury list as well. So keep some tabs on that. Jalen Waddle, also a little banged up. So I just think it's an unhealthy Dolphins team that's playing on a short week. Also with the extenuating circumstances around the hurricane. I just think it's too many factors. And especially since the Bengals are playing at home, I think it's a good buy low spot for this offense that really hasn't found its footing. But at some point, don't you think we're going to see a big game from Joe Burrow, from Joe Mixon, from Jamar Chase, from T. Higgins, from Tyler Boyd? There's just too many weapons.
I agree. And Joe Burrow said as much before that game against the Jets, went out, had a great performance against the Jets. And I know you're thinking, yeah, well, the Jets aren't the Dolphins. Totally get that. But also, Joe Burrow is a very confident quarterback who has weapons that at some point are going to come home. And, this is when you have to look at what you've seen in the first 3 weeks of the season and say, okay, I've got a decent sample size here, but I know throughout the course of the season, the stars are going to be the stars, even if they've struggled a little bit early. And I feel the same way about Joe Burrow. He is a better quarterback than Tua Tagovailoa. And now Tua is banged up. And I think if you're the Dolphins, you're going to try. And the last thing you want, even though the Dolphins certainly have weapons at receiver as well, clearly with Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle, you don't want to get in a passing match with Joe Burrow. I still think Joe has the advantage there. So I think if you're Tua and if you're the Dolphins, you maybe want to slow things down a touch here and maybe take advantage of the Cincinnati defense if you can, because I think if you're trying to match Joe Burrow, that is a recipe for failure.
And that's why you like the under, right? Total set at 47.5. It's a pretty healthy total. I think I'm staying away from this one just because the explosiveness that both of these offenses possess, and there's nothing worse than the entire game script going completely according to plan. Like you said, I do think that the Dolphins try to slow it down just a little bit, but at the same time, like, wouldn't it not be shocking if you saw Tyreek Hill go down the field in one fell swoop, getting a touchdown, 55 yards? I think that's probably the sabotage factor for the under, but hats off to you, my friend, for sweating an under, because I will not be doing that to myself. That sounds miserable.
Well, here's the thing is that I feel like I'm betting against myself because one of the props I do like, I think Tyreek Hill can have a big game and the under can still hit for a couple reasons. Number one is DJ Reader is out for the Bengals, and he is the primary run stopper on that Cincinnati defensive line. So that will give the Dolphins a chance to maybe be a little more balanced on offense. And I also think that Tyreek Hill can have a good game and the under can still hit because that has been the trend. Tyreek Hill is going to get his. He's too good not to. But the under in the Bengals' last 8 games overall, Chelsea, is 8-0. And the last 5 meetings between these two teams, the under is 5-0. And we've seen unders hit in prime time. Overall in the NFL, unders have hit at a rate of 67% this season. I know it may sound like double talk, but the under can still hit, and Tyreek Hill can still have a huge game. It's sort of like we were talking last week with the Bills. If I had told you that Josh Allen was going to get 400 yards passing and the Bills were going to lose, you probably would have said no way. But things like that can happen, and I think that does happen here.
Yeah, I mean, I think the primetime unders trend is also something to watch because we've seen unders be really hot in primetime. I don't know what it is, but that's been the thing so far this season. I'm trying to find a way to play Joe Burrow and either his passing yardage or his passing attempts, because right now his passing yardage set at 272.5 over at BetMGM. I do think he gets that. He's hit that in 2 of 3 games so far this season. But if you think that the Dolphins are looking a little anemic, which maybe they do, especially after the circumstances with the travel and with Tua, maybe we see the Bengals run the ball more. But I do think that Joe Burrow gets this number. I think that we can get some of these in big chunk yard plays with Jamar Chase and with T. Higgins and even Tyler Boyd, who had over 100 yards of receiving last week.
Let me ask you this, and you did touch on it a few minutes earlier, but how much of a factor is the Dolphins having to switch up their schedule? And it's certainly not going to be reflected in the numbers, but this is always one of those things. We talk about things not being able to be quantified. It's not like, well, the Dolphins' practice schedule because of Hurricane Ian is disrupted. Well, the line is moving. Those things do matter. But how much do they matter? I don't really have an answer for that, but I do think there's something to be said for maybe leaning towards the Bengals against the Dolphins team that A, is banged up, and B, is having its practice schedule disrupted because of this hurricane.
Well, especially because it's already a short week. So you're taking a short week and you're making it even shorter and you're traveling. So I just think all of the factors combined, because in sports betting, it seems like you never take just one of these factors, especially when it's not really something that is the matchup on the field on game day. But it does go into it somewhat. So when you have all these factors, when you have 17 things pointing in all one direction, don't you take that into effect? I think it's the accumulation of all these things and not just one thing in particular.
Yeah, I think that's right. And God, I feel like I'm going against, don't even feel like it. I am going against the money on the total and the spread here. I'm not going to place a bet as far as my best bets are concerned, but I do like the Bengals. laying 3.5. I do like the under here. It just feels like a spot to me where maybe the Dolphins are taken down a notch. I saw what the rankings on ESPN earlier this week, because you know how it is. After every week, let's rank the NFL teams from 1 to 32 in order, and Miami was number one. And I don't agree with that. I do not think the Miami Dolphins are the best team in the NFL. I think they're a very good team. I think they're a dangerous team. I think Tua is certainly getting better. The weaponry is impressive. That defense is better than you might think. But I'm not of the belief that the Miami Dolphins are the best team in football. And I think Cincinnati is going to show us that tonight.
All right, Jenks. So what about first half plays? Can I interest you in any of those? Because I think I'm off the first half spread just because it's only 3. The Bengals laying 3, and the juice is to the Dolphins. The Dolphins +3 -115. First half under, though, 23.5. Would you rather play that?
I don't think so. I think I'm going to go on the full game under. This is like when you talk first half numbers to me, that's like talking K props. I bet them maybe once in a blue moon, but I don't know enough about them. But maybe it's different too. Maybe we're talking about apples and oranges here.
No, because you can go to bed early, Jenks. That's why I brought it up, because I know you
Ooh.
love going to bed early. And there's nothing better than hitting your play in the first half and not having to sweat the entire second half.